Greetings, fellow cultivators. Welcome to Autonova. Remember to like and subscribe to support the journey. Now, let's dive into the next chapter of A Will Eternal. Bai Xiaochun almost couldn't control his breathing as he reached out and made a grasping gesture, causing the soul-hoarding pagoda to fly out of the soul cultivator's hand and fly toward him. As soon as he had it in hand, he sent some divine sense inside, and detected a strong spatial power that was uniquely designed to nourish souls. Now that his speculations were confirmed, his eyes began to shine with bright light. So, I was right. Soul-hoarding pagodas really are like bags of holding. Except, they're specifically designed to hold vengeful souls. If you put souls into a bag of holding, they slowly degenerate and eventually just fade away. But if you put them in a soul-hoarding pagoda, they'll stay in perfect condition forever. Furthermore, the reason I couldn't conjure 11-colored flame wasn't a lack of proficiency with the technique, nor any problems that cropped up during the process. The reason was because the souls I was using to try to make the 11-colored flame had already begun to degenerate. Although they had only degenerated a small bit because they were in a bag of holding, a little bit of degeneration with such a large group of souls would eventually build up into a major instability. The instability would only get more intense until eventually, it leads to detonation. So basically, if I keep the vengeful souls inside of a soul-hoarding pagoda, then when it comes time to conjure flame, I shouldn't have any problem at all. I should definitely be able to conjure 11-colored flame. Having reached this point in his train of thought, Bai Xiaochun was more excited than ever, and couldn't wait to test out his theory. When Zhou Yixing and the two soul cultivators saw how excited Bai Xiaochun was, none of them were really sure what was going on. Zhou Yixing was a bit taken aback, but the two soul cultivators were starting to get excited, convinced that this Grandmaster Necromancer was going to help them. Deciding that it was best to strike while the iron was hot, they exchanged a glance, then clasped hands and bowed deeply. Grandmaster, one of them said, there are plenty of vengeful souls in that soul-hoarding pagoda. As for the extra beyond what it will take to concoct the soul medicine in question, please keep them as our means of apologizing for everything that happened before. Ignoring Zhou Yixing and the two soul cultivators, Bai Xiaochun continued to examine the soul-hoarding pagoda with his divine sense, and then began to count how many souls were inside. From the number, he could tell that the Black Mountain tribe was both anxious about the matter they had brought to his attention, and also sincere in their offer. Feeling very pleased, he nodded and said, "All right, I'll help you concoct the..." Before he could finish speaking, though, he suddenly looked up into the sky. Soon, a beam of light became visible, streaking through the air at incredible speed as it headed directly toward the Black Mountain tribe. Even before it arrived, the aura of the Great Circle of Core Formation erupted from inside, causing the beam of light to shine radiantly in the evening sky. Everyone in the Black Mountain tribe was shaken, and countless savages gasped. As for the two soul cultivators standing near Bai Xiaochun, their faces fell as they looked up. Zhou Yixing was clearly shocked, and his pupils constricted as he realized that whoever this newcomer was, he had a profound cultivation base that was on par with his own. Everyone watched as the beam of light reached a position above the Black Mountain tribe, and then faded away to reveal a middle-aged man with long black hair that flowed over his shoulders. He had average features, but his murderous aura was especially strong. Furthermore, he was surrounded by a black mist, within which could occasionally be seen twisted faces that were apparently vengeful souls. The fluctuations emanating off of the man were not the soul power fluctuations of a soul cultivator. No, this man was a necromancer. Everything and everyone in the area was shaken by this lofty figure who gazed out of the corner of his eye at what was happening down below. After looking at Zhou Yixing, his gaze fell onto Bai Xiaochun for a moment, and then he noticed the soul-hoarding pagoda. At that point, a cold gleam appeared in his eyes, and he looked over at the two soul cultivators. "Are you the leaders of the Black Mountain tribe?" he said coldly. "Step forward and offer greetings." From his tone of voice, he seemed like the ultimate ruler of this area, as if his mere presence was good fortune for the Black Mountain tribe. Almost immediately, the two soul cultivators stepped forward nervously and then clasped hands and bowed deeply in formal greeting. "Greetings, exalted necromancer," they both echoed. "I, Li Feng, am here to solve the problem of your Black Mountain tribe's 500 portions of low-grade soul medicine. So hand over that soul-hoarding pagoda." Li Feng was clearly not making a request, and expected his words to be obeyed immediately. If not, he would raze the entire area to the ground. Actually, the entire reason he had come here was because he had been passing through the area and had heard the news that the Black Mountain tribe was offering a soul-hoarding pagoda in exchange for a large batch of low-grade soul medicine. The prospect of getting a soul-hoarding pagoda was very enticing to Li Feng. After all, soul-hoarding pagodas were relatively commonplace among necromancer clans, but Li Feng was a rogue cultivator. To him, paying the price of 500 portions of low-grade soul medicine to get a soul-hoarding pagoda would definitely be well worth it. As soon as he'd heard the news, he'd hurried over to the tribe's headquarters. Unfortunately, as soon as he saw that the soul-hoarding pagoda was in Bai Xiaochun's hands, he realized that he had probably arrived a bit too late. And yet, it was too important of an opportunity for him to just give up. And besides, he was still confident that he could get the soul-hoarding pagoda for himself, regardless of whether or not he had come late. Bai Xiaochun simply stood there, blinking a few times but withholding any comment. The two Black Mountain tribe soul cultivators were a bit stunned. Before Bai Xiaochun had shown up, they would have been ecstatic at Li Feng's arrival. But now that there were two necromancers to deal with, they weren't sure what to do. Obviously, they didn't want to offend either one of them. After a long moment of hesitation, one of them said, Exalted One, this other Grand Master already agreed to help us. In response, Li Feng's gaze sharpened, becoming something like sword light that shot toward Bai Xiaochun. The affairs of this region have nothing to do with you, he said. Furthermore, I want that soul-hoarding pagoda. Give it to me immediately. His glare was terrifying to behold, and his words were spoken with the utmost arrogance. From the cold look in his eye, he would obviously fly into a complete rage if Bai Xiaochun didn't do exactly as he said. There was also a certain disdain in his coldness, a disdain birthed from supreme self-confidence. Bai Xiaochun glared back up at Li Feng in irritation. As far as he was concerned, he had done the right thing by refraining from going around bullying people, and yet, here someone had come to try and bully him. That was especially true considering that the soul-hoarding pagoda was at stake. That pagoda was very important to him, and was not something he would simply abandon. What are you looking at? Li Feng said, his eyes flickering icily. I'm looking at you, Bai Xiaochun replied, popping his neck. Got a problem with that? As he stared, he mused that, in his entire life, he had never been bested in a staring contest. Considering that, he actually made his gaze look even more fierce as he stared up at Li Feng. The two soul cultivators from the Black Mountain tribe looked at Li Feng and then Bai Xiaochun, and finally just sighed. By this point, they knew that they couldn't do anything about the situation, and would just have to wait and see how things played out. Besides, as long as they got what they were looking for out of the deal, it didn't matter to them who won out in the end. After a few breaths worth of time, Li Feng suddenly laughed out loud. However, it was an icy, disdainful laugh that seemed to say he didn't want to lower himself to the level of speaking at length with Bai Xiaochun. With that, he extended his right hand, within which appeared a 10-colored flame. Almost immediately, the 10-colored flame caused the fading evening light to grow even dimmer. The Black Mountain tribe savages almost immediately began to cry out in surprise. 10-colored flame, heavens, he's at the peak of the Master Necromancer rank. The savages all began to drop to their knees to kowtow. The savages weren't the only shocked ones. The two soul cultivators' minds were reeling, and they immediately rushed forward to kowtow, feeling completely shaken. The peak of the Master Necromancer rank. Necromancers like that are very rare. With only a bit of progress, he'll reach the terrestrial rank. A necromancer like that agreeing to concoct soul medicine for us is good fortune for our tribe. I can't believe that this Li Feng is at the peak of the Master Necromancer rank. Wonderful, wonderful. Looks like we have a chance to survive after all. Off to the side, Zhou Yixing was feeling very excited at the chance to gloat at Bai Xiaochun's misfortune. If Li Feng could crush this necromancer Bai in battle, then Zhou Yixing would finally be free of his current situation. Come on, he thought, start fighting. Take him out. Li Feng was very pleased at the crowd's reaction. The truth was that he had only recently succeeded in conjuring 10-colored flame, so the feeling of being virtually worshipped for showing it in public was quite new to him. Looking down at Bai Xiaochun with a cold sneer, he said, screw off. Li Feng really was extremely confident in himself. He could tell that Bai Xiaochun had an extraordinary cultivation base, but he didn't care. The fact that he had the power of 10-colored flame on his side made him fully confident in being able to look down on almost anyone in the same cultivation level as himself. He was a necromancer who relied mostly on soulfire when it came to magical combat. As long as his opponent wasn't a higher-ranked necromancer than himself, and had a similar cultivation base, then he was confident in being able to secure victory. Li Feng looked down at Bai Xiaochun, chuckling coldly in his heart, completely confident that as long this opponent of his wasn't completely foolish, he wouldn't dare to cause problems. Bai Xiaochun frowned as he looked up at the openly aggressive Li Feng. At the same time, the words being spoken by the onlookers reached his ears. As far as Bai Xiaochun was concerned, Li Feng was being far too overbearing. Obviously, he was pulling out a 10-colored flame in an attempt to steal Bai Xiaochun's thunder. Shaking his head inwardly, Bai Xiaochun couldn't help but think that Li Feng didn't match up to him at all. This Li Feng has a core formation cultivation base, but his personality clearly doesn't match. We cultivators should emphasize inner qualities, and should refrain from bombastic showboating. Even if you want to show off, you shouldn't do it in such crude fashion. At the same time, he was wondering whether he should just exterminate him with a single blow, or show him by example what it meant to make a big scene. As he tried to decide what to do, the two soul cultivators from the Black Mountain tribe began to make vague requests of Bai Xiaochun to return the soul-hoarding pagoda. Considering that he could only conjure 7-colored flame, whereas Li Feng could conjure 10-colored flame, it seemed obvious who was in the superior position. However, they kept their requests extremely vague, as they didn't want to offend Bai Xiaochun. Bai Xiaochun simply ignored them, prompting Zhou Yixing to clear his throat and whisper, "This is not the type of person you want to mess with, Exalted One. Why don't we just back off?" Bai Xiaochun's glare intensified. More displeased than ever, he decided that it was indeed time to show, not only Li Feng, but everyone else present, what it meant to make a scene. I hate it when people try to show off in front of me, he thought. Sticking his chin up and looking around with disdain, he waved his hand to produce a tongue of 7-colored flame. The instant the 7-colored flame appeared, strange looks could be seen on the faces of the savages and the two soul cultivators. As for Li Feng, he chuckled softly and said, "I think you've bitten off a bit more than you can chew." Bai Xiaochun snorted. "Li Feng, when you run into necromancers in the wildlands, you would do well to hold back from saying things like that. You should really take this advice of mine to heart." The words sounded very profound and meaningful, and coupled with the way his hair floated around him and his clothing rippled in the wind, it made him seem very elegant and beyond ordinary. There was something archaic to his voice, something that echoed about in heaven and earth. It almost seemed rueful, as though he were thinking back to memories of the past. The entire picture he presented was instantly etched deeply into the minds of those present. "Allow me to elaborate," he continued. "You see, in a situation like this, you have no idea who exactly you are dealing with, and no clue as to what incredible individual you might be facing." Shaking his head, he waved his left hand, causing a vast quantity of vengeful souls to pour out from the soul-hoarding pagoda. As soon as the souls appeared, Bai Xiaochun threw the 7-colored flame out in front of him, causing it to spread out into a sea of fire. Then, he sent the vengeful souls pouring inside. It happened very quickly. In the blink of an eye, rumbling sounds could be heard as the sea of flames rushed back into Bai Xiaochun's palm, transforming into a single entity. It was a tongue of flame with an additional color. It had become 8-colored flame. All of the savages looked over with wide eyes. 8-colored flame. He just conjured flame. The wave of a hand turned 7-colored flame into 8-colored flame. The two soul cultivators were completely shaken. They had seen necromancers conjure flame in the past, but had never seen anyone do it as casually as Bai Xiaochun just had. He had moved with utmost fluidity, seemingly transforming 7-colored flame into 8-colored flame with almost no effort. They weren't the only shocked ones. Up in midair, Li Feng was equally stunned. After all, when he conjured 8-colored flame, it was always a very difficult process. All of a sudden, he had a very bad feeling, and almost lost control of his facial expression. Chuckling coldly, he said, "You must have had a lot of practice with 8-colored flame, right? So what if you've been stuck at that level for a long time? You still don't qualify to stand in front of me." Bai Xiaochun looked up at Li Feng, his expression placid as he said, "If 8-colored flame isn't enough for you, how about 9-colored flame?" Casually waving his hand, he spread the 8-colored flame out into a sea of fire, then sent more vengeful souls pouring out of the soul-hoarding pagoda. No time passed at all before the sea of flames began to swallow up the souls. Despite the speed with which it happened, there was obviously some pattern involved in the way that the souls were fed into the sea of flames. Then, Bai Xiaochun slowly closed his palm into a fist, causing the sea of fire to fall back in upon itself within his grasp. After the fire was all contained between his fingers, he opened his hand again, revealing a flame with 9 colors. 9-colored flame. The savages were no longer stunned, but were left gasping in shock. The two soul cultivators' eyes were popping out of their heads, and they were panting, their minds reeling out of control. Li Feng was beginning to shake as he stared at the flame in Bai Xiaochun's hand. The casual way that he had conjured the nine-colored flame was something that Li Feng had never seen before, and left him feeling as if unprecedented levels of pressure were weighing down on him. It seemed almost unimaginable that someone could conjure nine-colored flame with such ease. If he wanted to conjure nine-colored flame, he would have to go into secluded meditation and spend significant time clearing his thoughts before making an attempt. And even then, he wouldn't succeed every time. "This is impossible," he muttered, panting. "Nothing is impossible," Bai Xiaochun said with a slight shake of his head. "Just because you think something is hard doesn't mean that everyone will feel the same. I mean, it's just nine-colored flame, that's all." Looking as calm as ever, he sent more vengeful souls flying out of the soul-hoarding pagoda, filling everything within a 300-meter area and forcing the crowd to back away as his nine-colored flame spread out into a raging sea. It was a shocking sight. The vengeful souls merged into the sea, a process which took a few breaths worth of time, after which Bai Xiaochun once again closed his palm into a fist. Within moments, the raging sea of fire had shrunk down and was hidden within his hand. Everyone was devolving into madness at Bai Xiaochun's performance, which made him seem like the ultimate ruler of flame. It was as if all types of fire would capitulate and acknowledge allegiance to him. "Even 10-colored flame isn't really a big deal," Bai Xiaochun said, smiling faintly. When he opened his hands, all faces fell as scintillating light exploded out in all directions to reveal 10-colored flame. Furthermore, this 10-colored flame seemed particularly vibrant and lively, its heat so intense that the air rippled, almost as though it were about to ignite. Everyone in the area was forced to back up again, expressions of profound shock on their faces as they looked at Bai Xiaochun. Clearly, Li Feng's 10-colored flame was much dimmer than Bai Xiaochun's. Despite being of the same level, it was obviously weaker by far. Along with the appearance of the 10-colored flame came shocked exclamations from the savages, expressions of complete and utter astonishment. The peak of the Master Necromancer rank, heavens, Grandmaster Bai, is actually at the peak of the Master Necromancer rank. The two soul cultivators were completely stunned, and looked like they had seen a ghost. Never in their wildest imaginations could they have guessed that Bai Xiaochun would conjure a 10-colored flame, the quality of which clearly surpassed that of Li Feng's. Li Feng was shaking visibly, and his hair was already disheveled. As he stared at the flame in Bai Xiaochun's hand, his mind began to turn into a blank. Impossible. This is just impossible. Moments ago, he had been hovering there with a feeling of complete superiority, but now he suddenly found that there was someone present who was far superior to himself. Zhou Yixing was similarly shocked. He had known before that Bai Xiaochun could conjure 10-colored flame, and yet, the flame currently dancing in his palm caused Zhou Yixing's heart to pound wildly. Is that really 10-colored flame? I've never seen 10-colored flame that dazzling. Zhou Yixing looked up at Bai Xiaochun's face, terror written on his own. Bai Xiaochun was quite pleased by all the looks of shock among the crowd that surrounded him. However, he didn't allow any hint of that to show on his face, and in fact, pretended as if he couldn't care less about what was going on. After glancing at the tongue of flame in his palm, he looked up at the shocked Li Feng and said, "If 10-colored flame isn't sufficient, well then, how about 11-colored flame?" In response, the savages of the Black Mountain tribe erupted into wild cheering, and the two soul cultivators let out shouts of surprise. 11-colored flame. Only terrestrial necromancers can conjure that. No wonder, Zhou Yixing gasped, and up in the air, Li Feng was trembling. Before any of them could say anything, Bai Xiaochun's eyes glittered with profound light. The time had come to test out whether his previous analysis was correct or not. He sent some divine sense into the soul-hoarding pagoda, which shivered as it began to belch out large quantities of vengeful souls. As they filled the area, coldness spread out, an ill wind that made the place seem like a land of death. Even as the vengeful souls howled and attempted to flee, Bai Xiaochun said, "Flame, disperse." He waved his hand, and the 10-colored flame spread out in all directions to form a huge sea of fire. Yet again, the onlookers backed away in fear. 10-colored light filled the sky, and the wind screamed as the intense power of the flame exploded out in all directions. The sea of fire was like a cyclone whipping about as it devoured all of the vengeful souls. The mist-like strands that were the fleeing souls could not possibly have been fast enough to escape the flames, and it took only about 30 breaths of time before the entire 3,000-meter area surrounding Bai Xiaochun was completely devoid of any vengeful souls. The sea of fire raged in shocking fashion around Bai Xiaochun, making it almost impossible to see him. Everyone in the area looked on with shock and terror, their hearts battered by waves of astonishment. As of this moment, Bai Xiaochun truly looked like a sovereign of flame. That was even more the case when he extended his right hand and said, "Form." It was only a single word, but it seemed to contain the power of magical law, a power that forced the fire in the area to begin to converge onto Bai Xiaochun's palm, a process which took only the briefest of moments. As he closed his fingers, every last bit of fire disappeared into his hand, after which, the entire audience looked on with bated breath and quivering hearts. No one spoke. Zhou Yixing stood there, heart-pounding, almost unable to believe what he was seeing, and at the same time, more nervous than ever before. Bai Xiaochun's expression was the same as ever, as if everything which was happening was beneath his interest. Of course, the truth was that he was feeling immensely proud of himself, and was reveling in the gazes of the audience. He even intentionally slowed his movements as he opened his fingers. The moment his fist opened up, a tongue of flame appeared, the heat of which caused everything in the surrounding 3,000-meter area to ripple and distort. An intense sensation of deadly crisis filled the hearts of all present, and everyone was certain that the slightest touch of that flame would reduce them to nothing but ashes. At the same time, thunder rumbled in the sky above. The appearance of the flame had provoked a heavenly sign. All eyes were fixed dead on the flame, which had become the most dazzling and eye-catching thing in existence to the people present. At the same time, the ground beneath Bai Xiaochun's feet began to melt, as if it couldn't endure the intense heat of the flame. However, Bai Xiaochun himself wasn't harmed in the least. The numerous colors within the flame danced and leapt, making it difficult to see the number of colors clearly. However, anyone who focused the power of their cultivation base on their eyes would quickly be able to tell that the flame had 11 colors. Shockingly, it was 11-colored flame. A short silence prevailed, after which the entire audience erupted into shouts of excitement and praise, causing a sound wave to roll out in all directions. Is that really 11-colored flame? I've never seen 11-colored flame in my entire life. 11-colored flame. 11-colored flame. Grandmaster Bai isn't at the master rank, he's a terrestrial necromancer. A terrestrial necromancer. A person like that would be welcomed with full honors in any necromancer clan. In fact, it would be the same even in Giant Ghost City. The savages were completely overwhelmed, and as for the two soul cultivators, they were virtually struck mute. Shaking physically, they looked at Bai Xiaochun in disbelief, feeling like they might collapse at any moment. Terrestrial necromancer. He's a terrestrial necromancer. Upon recovering their wits to some extent, they immediately flopped down and began to kowtow, their hearts filled with awe and reverence. To them, a terrestrial necromancer was the type of grand entity that could shake all the lands with the single stomp of a foot. And just such a person was standing right in front of them. Then the two of them contemplated how they had just suggested that he return the soul-hoarding pagoda they had offered. Despite how vaguely they had made the suggestion, the mere fact that they had struck them both with deep levels of fear and panic. If they had such a reaction, it almost wasn't necessary to mention Li Feng, whose eyes were on the verge of popping out of his skull. Shivering physically, he suddenly dropped out of the air and landed onto the ground. "Grandmaster, please calm yourself," he said, ashen-faced, his fear going so deep that his soul began to tremble. The fact that he had possibly offended someone he should never have offended caused his hair to stand on end, and filled his heart with a sea of bitterness and grief. At the same time, he was stunned that an illustrious terrestrial necromancer would concoct soul medicine for a small tribe just to get a soul-hoarding pagoda. Zhou Yixing was equally flabbergasted, and was staring with brightly shining eyes at Bai Xiaochun. Earlier, he had had his doubts, and had even felt scorn for Bai Xiaochun, but now, he was fully convinced of what kind of person he was, and his heart began to burn with fervor. He knew for a fact that this necromancer hadn't been able to conjure 11-colored flame before. Then, after not much time passed at all, he conjured that very flame with complete ease, even perfection. It left Zhou Yixing completely shaken and in awe. More than that, he actually felt that it was good fortune for him to have become the follower of a terrestrial necromancer. That was especially because of the ease with which he conjured flame. Clearly, this necromancer Bai was spectacularly talented, and that meant that there was always the possibility that he would reach the celestial rank. Since Zhou Yixing was his first follower, and had no one else to compete with, that meant it would be easier to curry favor. Having reached this point in his train of thought, Zhou Yixing's zeal and devotion grew. Bai Xiaochun stood there for a moment, basking in the gazes, and then cleared his throat and looked over at Li Feng. All right, an important person like me wouldn't stoop to the level of causing problems for someone like you. Although, considering how talented you seem, you really need to listen to me when I tell you to keep a low profile. Look at how awesome I am. And yet, did you ever see me going around trying to show off?" He waved his hand, storing the 11-colored flame away in his bag of holding. Then he swished his sleeve, keeping his chin stuck up as he sauntered back toward his immortal's cave. Li Feng chuckled bitterly in his heart. As far as he was concerned, if this Grandmaster considered himself to be keeping a low profile, then he obviously had no idea what it meant to do the opposite. However, he didn't dare to speak such words aloud. All he did was gratefully voice his agreement. At the same time, he had similar thoughts to the ones Zhou Yixing had just had. If I could become a follower of this terrestrial necromancer and receive some occasional pointers, that would be good fortune for me. And what if he even agreed to teach me some things? Life as a rogue cultivator was hard, and people like Li Feng would rarely get a chance to even see a terrestrial necromancer. Therefore, he gritted his teeth and decided that, no matter what happened, no matter how much fawning or fighting it took, he would become this necromancer's follower. At that point, he subconsciously glanced over at Zhou Yixing and thought, this guy must already be one of his followers. I've got to do better than him. Zhou Yixing noticed Li Feng's glance, and could guess what he was thinking. Less than pleased, he decided to keep his guard up even more than before. There's no way I'm going to let this guy surpass me as a follower. Both of them could see the hostility in each other's glances. Instead of leaving, Li Feng chose to stay in the Black Mountain tribe, where he planted himself at Bai Xiaochun's side and leapt to meet his every demand, even if it meant going through hell and high water. It put a lot of pressure on Zhou Yixing, and also served to increase his own zeal and devotion. Bai Xiaochun didn't drive Li Feng away. Instead, he wallowed in the wonderful feeling of having two people fawning over him. I really am just too outstanding. Wherever I go, people kowtow to me left and right. It's really hard to reject such treatment. I guess I'm just too much of a softie. Of course, the savages were even more fanatical about Bai Xiaochun than before, and the soul cultivators had begun treating him as if he were some sort of god. All the energy of the tribe was focused on fulfilling any request that Bai Xiaochun made, which he found to be a wonderful thing. At the same time, he didn't forget that he had promised to concoct soul medicine for them. However, before taking on that task, there was something very important to be done, something that could not be delayed. That very night, he sent his 3 clones out into the darkness to stand guard, and then sealed his immortal's cave with numerous restrictive spells. Finally, he sat down cross-legged and carefully took off his mask. After the mask was off, he looked around vigilantly. Outside, his clones did the same thing. Only after they were all sure that the coast was clear did Bai Xiaochun relax a bit. Now that I can concoct 11-colored flame, it's time to perform a spirit enhancement on this mask and see if I can remove the branding mark inside and replace it with my own. If I do that, then nobody should be able to find me through it. Eyes sparkling, he pulled out his turtle wok and prepared everything from 1 to 11-colored flame. After performing the first 10 spirit enhancements, he put the 11-colored flame into the wok. Almost instantly, the wok began to shine with bright golden light that instantly filled the entire immortal's cave. The energy which pulsed within that golden light left Bai Xiaochun feeling completely shaken. Thankfully, this wasn't his first time using 11-colored flame, he had also done so in the illusory world of the trial by fire. Therefore, he settled his chi and calmed his mind, then waited for the turtle wok to suck in all of the golden light. When the time was right, he put the mask into the wok. It's definitely going to work. The mask was very important, so of course Bai Xiaochun was very concerned with how things could turn out. His eyes were glued to the mask as the golden light in the wok grew more dazzling and boundless, transforming into countless golden threads that converged on the mask itself. Then, they rapidly merged together, covering the mask and causing deep rumbling sounds to echo out in the immortal's cave. Finally, right before his eyes, the mask began to melt. Within moments, it had transformed into a milky white liquid that emanated a fragrant aroma, a mere whiff of which left Bai Xiaochun feeling enlivened. An 11-fold spirit enhancement returns the object to its essence. That leaf transformed into a tree, whereas this mask became a drop of essence liquid. The milky white liquid rapidly formed into a pearl that glowed with soft light. Shockingly, on the surface of that pearl was a golden design. As the turtle wok went dark, Bai Xiaochun's anxiety mounted. Finally, he picked up the pearl, whereupon he could sense an aura within it that contained the power of illusion. By merely sensing that aura, he suddenly felt as if he were surrounded by an illusory world. No longer was he in his immortal's cave, he was in a celestial paradise, filled with immortal mountains, immortal cranes, spirit flowers, and mystical mists. It was almost impossible to tell whether it was real or not. Thankfully, the sensation quickly passed, and he regained his senses. Then, he looked suspiciously at the pearl he held in his hand. This thing's powers of illusion surpassed that of the old mask by far. There are probably even more differences that I will have to discover over time. Heart pounding wildly, he examined the pearl further to ensure that there were no branding marks on it. Only then did he place his own branding mark onto it. The white pearl flickered as a link was created between him and it. It worked. I never felt anything like this with the mask. Laughing heartily, Bai Xiaochun pushed the pearl down onto his forehead, whereupon it vanished into his heaven-span Dharma eye. Moments later, his facial features blurred, and then transformed back into Bai Hao's. As of this point, there wasn't the slightest crack in his mask disguise. Whether it was his soul fluctuations or any other aspect of him, not a single shred of evidence that he was Bai Xiaochun remained. In the past, certain almighty figures such as demigods might have been able to notice some abnormalities caused by the mask. But now, not even demigods would pick up on any clues. Meanwhile, in the very moment that Bai Xiaochun transformed the mask into a pearl by removing the previous branding mark and replacing it with his own, something happened in a location a vast distance away in the wildlands. In that location was a shocking city that was completely golden and matchlessly large. It almost looked like a golden dragon, emanating an intense pressure that would suppress anything in the area. That city was none other than Arch-Emperor City. In the very middle of Arch-Emperor City, floating high in the air, was an area filled with floating clouds that seemed to contain a city of its own within them. It was the location of the Imperial Palace. Inside the palace, in an extravagantly decorated hall, an old man sat cross-legged in meditation. He wore luxurious clothing, and was the type of person who seemed threatening without being angry. He occupied a very high position, the type who could determine the fates of tens upon tens of thousands of people with a single word. His cultivation base was profoundly enigmatic, and even from a distance, he looked like a divine, godly being. The moment the branding mark was erased from the mask, the old man's eyes opened, causing golden light to spill out. Anyone who looked into those eyes would be shaken to the core. As soon as the old man's cultivation base fluctuations began to roll out, the entire imperial palace began to shake. "It's gone," he murmured, frowning. A moment later, he waved his hand, causing the main door of the palace hall to swing open noiselessly and reveal a middle-aged man, who bowed and scraped his way inside. "Grand Heaven Master, His Excellency was startled by your cultivation base fluctuations just now. He has asked your humble servant to come and inquire as to what aroused your wrath." "It seems His Excellency is a bit too high-strung," the old man replied. "Now that I think about it, it's the perfect time for him to go into secluded meditation. That way he can increase his cultivation base a bit and build up some courage. Pass down orders that His Excellency will enter a 10-year period of secluded meditation, starting immediately." With that, the old man closed his eyes. Back in the area near Giant Ghost City, Bai Xiaochun was in the Black Mountain tribe, feeling at his face. Pleased, he called back his 3 clones, then studied the soul-hoarding pagoda for a bit before summoning a large group of vengeful souls. Then he waved his hand and pinched his fingers together, creating something like a gravitational force that caused the cloud of souls to converge on his palm. As they formed into a one-colored flame, he spread his arms wide, causing the flame to transform into something that looked like a piece of crystal. "So, this is soul medicine?" Bai Xiaochun grabbed the crystal, and could immediately sense the soul power fluctuations coming from it. Then he began to study it a bit more closely. Seems simple enough. The only difficulty lies in how many colors are in the flame. So, only people who can conjure flame can concoct soul medicine. I just wonder if you can use real medicine concocting techniques to make the soul medicine even better? After some thought, he produced a pill furnace, tossed the soul medicine inside, and began to use some of the concocting methods he knew. However, nothing happened. Bai Xiaochun even took out some medicinal pills and tried to combine them with the soul medicine. He put quite a bit of effort into it, even adding in some plants and vegetation, and yet, in the end, got little out of it. Well, that doesn't work. It adds a bit of medicinal mist to the soul medicine, but that won't do much of anything at all. Definitely too much of a waste of resources to provide any help in cultivation. Not worth it. However, it seems I can get a bit of effect by adding toxic elements. In the end, he just gave up. Although it seemed like a pity, there really weren't any significant changes to the soul medicine. In fact, only Grandmaster alchemists would even notice the slight changes inside. However, all of this made sense considering the wildlands was a place devoid of medicinal plants and vegetation. Even after further study, Bai Xiaochun was left with no other option than to give up on the idea of combining soul medicine with ordinary medicinal pills. Although he was a bit disappointed, there was simply no way to get these two completely different types of medicine to work together. Oh well. At least I know how to add toxic elements. Perhaps that will prove to be useful one of these days. With that, he continued on with the task of concocting soul medicine. After all, he had promised the Black Mountain tribe that he would do this for them, and he was the type of person who lived up to his promises. Therefore, the following days were focused mostly on that task. All of the work was done with the souls they provided. Considering the predicament they were in, and how soft-hearted Bai Xiaochun was, he didn't impose any further requirements on them. A few days later, Bai Xiaochun was looking at 500 full portions of low-grade soul medicine, and feeling very pleased at how impressive he was. I guess it isn't that bad that I'm stuck away from the Great Wall temporarily. Since I'm good at concocting soul medicine, I should be able to dominate the scene out in the wildlands just as well as back home. He was immeasurably self-satisfied, and couldn't help but sigh at how outstanding he was. No matter where he went, he always managed to come out on top. Perhaps that's just my biggest strong suit. He closed his eyes to revel in the feeling, but then, he couldn't help but think back to the scene back in the labyrinth when everyone was teleported away. That got him wondering about where Master God Diviner, Song Ke, and Zhao Long had ended up. I wonder where they are now. All of a sudden, he was filled with anticipation at being reunited with them somewhere in the wildlands. For some reason, that made him feel less lonely. After thinking about it for a bit longer, he cleared his throat and then reached up to feel his disguised face. In the past few days, he had come to find that, not only did the power of the pearl mask cover his own aura, but it also disguised the fluctuations that were caused by conjuring flame. Now, he could conjure flame whenever or wherever he wanted, and no one would be able to detect it. What a lovely treasure. Eventually, he put the matters of the mask aside for the time being and pulled out his soul-hoarding pagoda to examine it. After I give the 500 portions of low-grade soul medicine to the Black Mountain tribe, my task here will be accomplished. Although this place isn't bad, there's no reason to stay here. With that, he settled into contemplation. On the one hand, he really needed to figure out how to get back to the Great Wall, but on the other hand, he also wanted to acquire the formula for 15-colored flame. Most importantly, he needed to find more diva souls. If he didn't, he would be unable to break through from the gold core stage into the nascent soul stage. It's all the fault of that damned Mistress Red Dust. The thought of who had pushed him into this predicament caused him to gnash his teeth. Furthermore, he was now determined to make sure that, one day, Mistress Red Dust and Chen Hichan knew exactly how awesome he was. Before, he had scanned the soul-hoarding pagoda a bit with divine sense, but had never taken the time to study it in detail. Now that he was finished with his soul medicine task, he calmed himself down to do just that, his goal being to figure out how soul-hoarding pagodas worked. However, after a detailed inspection, he couldn't come up with any clues. The soul-hoarding pagoda was filled with a mist that his divine sense had a hard time piercing. However, he could sense a profound sensation of age within the pagoda. There's too much of that mist. That's what's making it hard to see inside. Alright, soul-hoarding pagoda, you just watch and see how I handle you. HMMMPHH. Since you belong to me now, I'll use spirit enhancement techniques to clean you up a bit. I don't care whose branding mark is hiding inside of you, I'm going to erase it for good. What had occurred with the mask had impressed upon Bai Xiaochun what exactly he could do with magical items that had been given to him by others. Therefore, it was with great secrecy that he sent his 3 clones out to collect more vengeful souls. On top of that, he ordered Zhou Yixing and Li Feng to do the same thing, as well as the rest of the Black Mountain tribe. A few days later, his 3-pronged method of attacking the matter resulted in him having enough souls to produce everything from 1 to 11 colored flame. That very evening, he conjured the 11 colored flame he needed. Without the slightest hesitation, he then produced his turtle walk and tossed the soul-hoarding pagoda inside to give it an 11-fold spirit enhancement. Golden light flashed, and the soul-hoarding pagoda changed appearance. Instead of being gray, it was now crystalline and exquisite. Furthermore, it had a single golden design on its surface. The little pagoda was now completely different, and would be extremely enticing even to the most powerful necromancer. Bai Xiaochun grabbed the crystalline soul-hoarding pagoda and then elatedly branded it with his mark. When he felt the invisible connection that came into being as a result, he could finally relax. Now this soul-hoarding pagoda truly belongs to me, and me alone. Laughing heartily, he sent some divine sense inside it to examine it again. This time, there was no obscuring mist blocking his ability to clearly see it through and through. But then, his expression turned very serious. He sent more power into his divine sense, causing it to fill the entire soul-hoarding pagoda. There, very deep inside, in an area which had once been covered by mist, Bai Xiaochun could now see. evidence of a restrictive sealing spell. The sealing mark was very faint, and wouldn't be detectable except upon close examination. A sealing mark. His first thought was that the members of the Black Mountain tribe must have been courting death by trying to con him. But soon, he realized that that was probably not the case. Based on what he could detect, the sealing mark seemed to be just as ancient as the soul-hoarding pagoda itself. After a bit of thought, his eyes glittered, and he attempted to open the sealing mark and see what exactly was inside. But after a few tries, he found that the mark was apparently fabricated from an aura of death. Without a massive blast of divine sense, it would be impossible to open. In fact, Bai Xiaochun could tell that he was currently incapable of getting past it. Interesting. A seemingly ordinary soul-hoarding pagoda turns out to have an ancient sealing mark inside. He retracted his divine sense and then sat there thinking, his eyes shining brightly. If I want to open it, I have to blast it with incredible power. My cultivation base isn't strong enough at the moment, but that doesn't necessarily mean I'm out of options. Alright, soul-hoarding pagoda, you just watch and see how Lord Bai does things. With that, he slapped his bag of holding to produce a large bucket. It was as tall as a person, and almost 2 meters wide, and as soon as it appeared, it erupted with powerful spiritual power. Shockingly, that bucket was filled to the brim with Heavenspan River water. Back during the haunting of the river-defying sect, Bai Xiaochun had, in his fear, submerged his mask in this very bucket. Even he had forgotten about that matter for a while. Considering that he needed a big blast of spiritual power to deal with the soul-hoarding pagoda, this was the perfect item to retrieve from his bag of holding. Heavenspan River water is a major rarity in the wildlands. This bucket might not make me the richest person here, but definitely a big moneybags. Licking his lips, he looked at the bucket and then back at the crystalline soul-hoarding pagoda. With the spiritual power in this bucket, I should be able to blast open that sealing mark. Eyes sparkling, he performed a right-handed incantation gesture and then waved his finger at the soul-hoarding pagoda. Instantly, a gravitational force sprang up, causing more than half of the water in the bucket to surge toward the sealing mark in the depths of the pagoda. The soul-hoarding pagoda shook physically as Bai Xiaochun sent his divine sense inside to watch the sealing mark falling apart under the barrage of Heavenspan River water. And yet, even as it broke apart, it began to heal itself. Bai Xiaochun quickly performed another incantation gesture, sending more water into the pagoda. The healing signs vanished, and more cracks appeared. It looked like the sealing mark would fall apart at any moment. However, it was in that very moment that suddenly, a terrifying aura leaked out that caused Bai Xiaochun's face to immediately fall. Even just brushing against that aura with his divine sense left him utterly shaken and gasping for air. Leaping to his feet, he exclaimed, That's. He quickly performed an incantation gesture to pull all of the Heavenspan River water back from inside of the pagoda. Thankfully, after he did that, the sealing mark ceased collapsing. However, it had apparently lost its ability to repair itself, and now remained in a dilapidated state, as if only a bit more power could destroy it. Bai Xiaochun got his breathing under control and then stared back into the pagoda, his eyes shining with fear. That aura surpasses anything I've ever felt from any person, even from devas. It's very similar to the aura I sensed back in the trial by fire in the labyrinth, when I performed the 21-fold spirit enhancement on that leaf. That's an aura which surpasses devas. Don't tell me it's the demigod realm. What exactly is sealed inside of this pagoda? Thus, this episode comes to an end. Remember to like and comment so we can discuss the story together. Until we meet again in the next chapters.